Well, the Trump administration says 5 Arab countries are poised to sign normalisation deals with Israel. It follows the signing this week in Washington of agreements between Israel and Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. Only 2 other Arab Muslim countries recognise Israel, Egypt and Jordan. The White House did not specify which countries may be next, but Oman is widely expected to follow suit. The Palestinian leadership has condemned those moves. Well, the host of our Middle East Matters show, Sanam Shantyaei, is here with me now to talk a bit more about that. And Sanam, you were over in Dubai on the day that that deal was signed. How was this event marked and celebrated in the UAE, given that everyone is calling it a real historic agreement?
Laura, I think the one thing that we have to be clear about is the fact that we know that the UAE and Israel have had a relationship for the past decades, albeit a covert one. So what this agreement, what this ceremony on Tuesday did, was bring that allegiance out into the open, and that's why we're calling it historic time and time again. Now, in terms of marking the event in the UAE, officials had told us that they couldn't really hold celebrations because of the coronavirus pandemic, this health crisis. But interestingly, Laura, there wasn't even a real buzz beyond that. You know, even the local newspapers weren't really covering it as their major story. And there were speculations that the Israeli flag will be flying on top of one of the main towers, that's Burj Al Khalifa. That wasn't really the case. So if I had to put my editorial hat on here, which I may, I would say that they were being more cautious about this story. And that may be because of the Palestinian question. Of course, we know that previous administrations in the US have tried to achieve this broader peace for the region, for the Middle East, if you like, by doing so by using an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement as the foundation, as the premise. What the Trump administration did was exactly the opposite of that, by leaving the Palestinians out of the equation, and that's why the leadership there has said that they feel abandoned. Now, while I was in Dubai, I did an interview with an official from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Jamal al-Musharraf, and he said this is certainly not the case. Laura, should we take a quick listen to a segment of that interview together?
The Palestinian cause for the UAE is at the core of our foreign policy, is at the heart of our really policy in the region, that there must be a solution to this cause. And as the United Arab Emirates, we have never abandoned our Palestinian brothers and sisters, and we will never abandon them. And this accord was not at the expense of the Palestinians. It was a prerequisite, one of the prerequisites was the halting of annexation.
Jamal al-Musharraf there speaking from the Foreign Ministry. So Laura, that's the Palestinian question. Certainly, when it comes to geopolitics, this ceremony, this agreement makes a lot of sense. UAE and the Israel coming out, sending a massive message to other threats in the region, one of them, of course, being Iran. So yes, a transformation may well be underway in the region. You mentioned other countries who could follow suit, but some observers saying that this is also potentially a symbolic gesture.
Do you think we might then see some changes in the region as a result of all of this?
I think so. I think firstly, there's the business angle that we can't really ignore. You know, Israeli businesses will have the opportunity to work with a market that's worth up to $250 billion US per year. In addition to that, at the moment, what's really being discussed is direct passenger flights going between Israel and the UAE, which hasn't happened yet. And if it does, firstly, what it will do is it will enable Israeli airliners to fly over a peninsula that up until this point they've really had to avoid, which has added several hours to their detour. On top of that, we may see Israelis, tourists, descending on the luxury resorts and hotels in Dubai. And so we know that the Abu Dhabi Ministry of Culture and Tourism has already instructed the hotels, the restaurants, to start preparing for kosher meals and beverages. And this is not just one-sided. You know, several well-known figures in the UAE took to social media in the past week to say that they're very excited about the fact that they'll be able to go to Al-Aqsa Mosque, another controversial issue. And it doesn't come as a surprise that they were met with criticism from those who are opposed to the agreement, saying, look, even Palestinians across the West Bank and Gaza still can't do that. So they're worried that this could be a prelude to more persecution. So again, not surprising that a deal like this has polarized a region that's already very much divided.
Sanam, thank you very much indeed. Sanam Shantyaei there.